A military medical review in 1999 found 36 cases where live ordnance was lodged in patients. 4 of them died, but out of those who reached the operating table, over half got inside them a live 40mm grenade fired from an M79 grenade launcher. One such soldier was even recorded during the Vietnam War, and you're going to see it, after we go through how and why this weapon was created and why it was so dangerous to both the enemy and the side using it. In the early 1950s, the American infantry had a hole in their firepower between the maximum hand grenade range and the minimum mortar range. A soldier could throw a hand grenade about 30 to 40 meters if he's really strong, and the 60mm light mortar had a minimum range of about 180 meters. So when you have a bunker or something standing in your way, in this gap where you can't reach it with the grenade throw and it's too close for mortar, there's a problem. The first solution for the gap was the rifle grenade, and they'd stuck around since the First World War. However, they solved one problem and created a few more. Yes, you can throw the grenade much further than anyone could by hand, but to fire the rifle grenade, like with the American M7 launcher on the M1 Garand rifle for example, you had to clamp the launcher onto the rifle's muzzle to disable the gas system so it wouldn't break, to unload your rifle and to put in special blank cartridges that would propel the grenade, and then to aim and fire a grenade with enough recoil to break your collarbone. As soon as you fired it, you had to put a new grenade on and load a new blank cartridge. But if you're happy with where your grenade landed and would now like to use the rifle again, you have to take down the launcher to reactivate your gas operating system and to load standard rounds back in. Now, try doing all these things during a battle while people are shooting at you and while you never know what you need at any moment, a rifle or a grenade. This is also why a bunch of M7 grenade launchers were lost during World War II, as the soldiers had to strip them off the rifles quickly, so they usually ended up in the mud somewhere. On top of that, the accuracy wasn't really great and the recoil could easily damage the rifle. So to solve this after the war, the American military began working on a dedicated weapon that'd have the sole purpose of lobbing grenades to fill in this gap. They came up with the 40mm ammunition that they liked, but then got stuck with the problem of how to propel this round. If the cartridge was made like a standard enlarged rifle cartridge, the weapon would need a strong steel barrel, and it'd have huge recoil for shooting it from the shoulder. But they solved this by, quote-unquote, borrowing the German design called the high-low pressure system. The idea is that the propellant is kept inside a small portion of the case, while the rest is empty space around it. When fired, the gas vents into that space, lowers and evens out the pressure, so the projectile is pushed out gently with that signature bloop sound instead of a powerful muzzle blast. Now there's no need for a strong steel barrel to contain the high pressure, so it could be made from lighter material and the recoil was now much more comfortable, described as similar to a 12-gauge shotgun, although you can correct us on that if you ever get a chance to shoot one. Once that was out of the way, the problem was finding something that'd work with it in semi-auto mode, which they wanted so badly. No one could make the thing work without it being too heavy and impractical in the end, so the project dragged along for a few years before they temporarily dropped that semi-auto requirement and agreed to go with the simple break-action single shot to fill the gap until something better turned up. That was formally adopted as the M79. It looks like a sawn-off, single-barrel, oversized shotgun, and it actually works like one. You break it open at the breech, put in one 40mm grenade, close it up, and you're ready to rock and roll. It has a rifled aluminium barrel and a folding ladder sight graduated from 75 to 375 meters. The thing was actually quite handy for shooting, and the soldiers quickly learned to aim from the hip and hit targets accurately, even at over 200 meters. The grenade travels at about 76 meters per second, which is slow enough to watch it fly. Now, as for the 40mm grenade, it comes in a wide range of options that you can tailor to what you need most on the battlefield. The standard one is, of course, the high explosive round with 32 grams of composition B inside a wire-wound steel shell. When it bursts, it makes some 300 fragments that have a killing radius of 5 meters and a wounding radius of over 15 meters. There are modern 40mm grenades like the M433 dual-purpose round that has a small shaped charge inside the fragmentation shell. So the shaped charge makes a jet that can burn through 2 inches of steel armor, while the body fragments much like the old high-explosive round. The M397 went further with an airburst to defeat direct cover, with the grenade exploding over the enemy's head and showering him with fragments. But the good old HE is what's used most often. The M79 saw its first major war in Vietnam, and besides those high explosive shells, there were some quite creative ones as well. There's a flechette round with about 45 small finned steel darts that was supposed to be a solution in the jungle for the close-range problem of live 40mm grenades going into human bodies without detonating, which you're now going to hear about. But it turned out that these were a complete failure, as half of the darts didn't fly straight, but sideways, and didn't have enough power to penetrate the skin. A much better solution for this close-range problem was the buckshot round, which has 20 buck pellets and turns the grenade launcher into a giant shotgun. Then you'd have a bunch of other 40mm grenades for various purposes other than just killing, like a flare round that has a small parachute and burns for about 40 seconds to light up a 200-meter circle. There's CS gas rounds and even non-lethal rubber rounds to get someone down really hard without killing him. You know, hopefully. Anyway, the M79 in Vietnam was given to a designated Grenadier in each squad of 2 fire teams most of the time, and these guys were really appreciated in the jungle and rice paddies. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters hiding behind logs and berms could now be engaged much more effectively without waiting for artillery or helicopter support. The Grenadier carried his M79, M1911 sidearm, and as many grenades as he could, up to over 100 depending on the mission. And one weighs 230 grams or half a pound, so you can imagine the weight. But the thing was effective, and the soldiers loved to have a good grenadier who knew how to put those grenades through the openings of foxholes and bunkers. The problem, however, was the rate of fire. Because it's a break-open action, you could put out some 5 or 6 aimed rounds a minute, but the bigger problem was the range I mentioned. And not the maximum range, the minimum range. You see, in order to not get killed by his own grenade when firing, the Grenadier should be outside its kill radius, and accidentally hitting a tree or something close to you puts you within that radius, so the high explosive round was created in a way that it wouldn't arm for about 30 meters after being fired, so it'd hit like a dud. For example, there's a story of a soldier shooting the M79 and accidentally hitting a tree 6 feet in front of him, and the grenade bounced back and hit him in the groin. And although he had an operation on that part of his body, he's at least grateful that it didn't detonate there. Only after the round spins a specific number of times in flight does the detonator come into place, where it can then detonate the round when it hits something. This also saves you from getting killed if you drop your 40mm grenade, or if something hits it while it's in your pouch. But what happens when, in places like the jungle of Vietnam, someone jumps in front of you? It's an enemy soldier. You're a Grenadier, and the only thing you have ready is your M79. As there's no time to think, you fire and hit the enemy soldier. Well, if he's far enough, it's going to be a really bad day for him when that grenade goes off, and an open casket wouldn't be an option. However, if he's within that minimum range, it's most likely not going to explode. But half a pound of something hard that flies 75 meters per second is definitely going to do something. If he survives the hit by some chance, he's then left with a live high-explosive grenade inside his body that someone now has to take out. No one knows how close to arming the grenade came during that flight, and moving it is not the smartest thing to do. But someone has to do it if this guy is to be helped. Now, if you remember those 36 cases of soldiers getting live ordnance stuck inside their bodies that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, well, out of those 32 that survived, 18 of them were cases of 40mm grenades fired from the M79. The most famous case that got recorded was during the Vietnam War in Saigon, when a 52-year-old South Vietnamese farmer was shot by an M79 for some reason, and the grenade went inside his skin and stopped on the other side, just above his right kidney. The man actually walked into the operating room by himself, and they only discovered it was a 40mm grenade when an X-ray was done. So now 2 American surgeons and 1 anesthetist volunteered to pull out the grenade. They made an improvised operating room with sandbags and armored glass, with holes they'd put instruments through. They fixed a scalpel to the end of a 5-foot pole, and with these huge forceps, over 13 minutes, managed to pull the grenade out, and a bomb disposal team handled it. And what's interesting is that out of those 32 cases of live ordnance getting stuck inside people, all were taken out safely without detonating. But I imagine it was a hell of a time for the surgeons. The M79 also got a horrible reputation for going off when it isn't supposed to, and it actually killed or wounded quite a few American soldiers in Vietnam. It got so bad that the order came that the M79 was to be carried with the breech open, and closed only when the Grenadier wanted to fire. The safety was a small sliding catch on the wrist of the stock, and it was easy to move from safe to fire. And because it was positioned there, it was also easy to do it by accident while you're just carrying the thing through the jungle. Once the safety was set to fire, it was even easier to catch the trigger with a vine or something and set the thing off in who knows which direction. Sometimes it hit the ground or a tree without detonating and scared the life out of everyone. But other times it wasn't so lucky, and some unfortunate soldier would get hit. There's a case of a medic hit by an accidentally discharged M79 who got his collarbone broken, then the one who got his calf muscle blown off with buckshot, or the one who got a dislocated shoulder. There are also a few who didn't survive. So you see why people got nervous with the Grenadier close by. Oh, and by the way, you'd want to keep your thumb to the side while firing the M79, because that same safety had a bad habit of biting off a piece of your hand during the recoil. It was eventually replaced by the M203, a single-shot launcher firing these same grenades, only now mounted under the barrel of the M16, which gave the soldier both the real rifle to fight with and the grenade launcher he could use anytime he needed. As for the 40mm grenade, it outlived the M79 and is still a standard NATO family of ammunition for various new grenade launchers.